welcome, welcome. Here we're going to do part one. We're going to look at some of our Punnett square genetics vocab first. So you should have page 2 up of your vocab practice. Let's get into it. All right, so for each of the genotypes below, determine what the phenotype should be. So we're given the genotype. The genotype is going to be these letters. It's asking what the phenotype should be. So the phenotype is that physically expressed trait. It tells us that purple flowers are dominant to white flowers. So we know if there are, in this classically dominant scenario here, purple is dominant. So whenever we see a dominant allele or a capital letter, we'll know that that will be purple. So first up, we have two capital P's, capital B, capital P. That means, hey, something's going to be dominant here. I know that it will be purple. Next up, we have a heterozygote, meaning we have one of each capitalization. We have a big P and a little p. Again, the dominant allele is present, so that flower will be purple. All right, lastly, we have our little p, our homozygous dominant, homo meaning the same, they're the same capitalization. And it is actually recessive because there's no dominant allele present. And if it's recessive, purple is dominant to white. That means this one will have a white phenotype. All right, number 2. Hairy knuckles are dominant. So again, we're going to look at dominant to non-hairy knuckles in humans. Hairy knuckles are dominant. We see a big H for our allele. It's going to present that dominant trait. So first up, we have an HH, capital, capital. Hairy knuckles are dominant. That means this will be hairy. Next, we have our heterozygote, one of each capitalization, one big, one little. We have a dominant allele present with this big H. That means, oops, it will be hairy. And lastly, our little h, are homozygous recessive. We don't see that dominant allele, and hairy knuckles are dominant to non-hairy. That means this last one will be expressed in the phenotype of non-hairy. All right, last little bit of practice here with our genotypes dictating our phenotypes. Bobtails in cats are recessive. So it's telling us what the recessive trait is first. Keep that in mind. Normal tails, those are the dominant ones there. All right, so first up, we got our big T, it is homozygous dominant. We see at least one dominant allele, meaning we see the dominant phenotype of a normal tail. All right, next up we have our heterozygote, one of each capitalization. We still have a dominant allele present. We're going to have the dominant phenotype of normal tails. And lastly, we have our homozygous recessive. And what is our recessive trait here? Bobtails. Great. Now let's move on down. For each of the following, write whether it is homozygous dominant, heterozygous, or homozygous recessive. So once again, homozygous means the same. Homo means same. Zygous means the zygousness of the two alleles that are present. Heterozygous, hetero means different. They will have different capitalizations in their genotypic letters for alleles there. All right, so let's start with this one. Is it going to be, first of all, homozygous or heterozygous? Well, they are the same capitalization, so we know it will be homozygous. But we also need to tell if it's dominant or recessive. Well, they are capital letters, meaning it will be dominant. All right, I'm going to go down. So the next one is capital P, little p. So we have to ask ourselves, is this homozygous or heterozygous? We have one of each. They are different capitalizations. So it will be heterozygous. All right, our last one in this column here, we have a little t, little t. Are we looking at a homozygote or a heterozygote? Well, they are the same capitalization, little t, little t. That means it will be homo. And looking at the capitalizations, it has little t's, which are the recessive form of our trait here. So it will be recessive. All right, next column, we got a little g, little g. They are the same capitalization, so it will be homozygous. And because they are little, we know it's going to be recessive. Next up, we have a capital I, little I. Capital I, little I. They are different capitalizations, so it will be hetero. And lastly, we have a big T, big T. They are the same capitalization, so it will be homozygous. And because they are capital, that means they're going to be dominant. That is the end of our vocab practice here. Follow to the next one if you want to watch our regular Mendelian monohybrid crosses.